Hit him with the high.
Hit him with the Heim.
I've been saying that. Boff.
Yeah.
Howard. Old Howard.
Here's a question that I think I'm always going to get. And the question usually is, I had a good conversation.
How tall are you?
And the answer is 7'4".
How much do you weigh?
461 pounds.
Everybody thinks you're like 60 and overweight. They say you sound.
Maybe I have the
like
voice of a 60-year-old overweight man. Is that what it is? I sound like that? Or maybe I talk. Maybe the way I put my words together.
Face and a head of that, you know. The rest of your body's skinny, but.
Well, I told you, remember, I won the Mr. Potato Man contest, which paid $5 to the winner. But anyway, great conversation that I had Friday night over a couple drinks. And it's a question that I keep hearing is, when do you think that you'll run out of material? When do you think that the show won't have anything to talk about? What do you mean, who am I drinking with?
Who are you drinking with?
I'm not going to say who I was drinking with. That's not important. What is important is that question.
Lover.
And no, I mentioned that here because I've been asked that by 100 different times by 100 different people.
When will the show be over? Is that what they're asking?
No. That's not it. It's when will we not have enough material to continue the show?
Right. Then the show would be over. Right?
Yes.
That's all.
But that's not the question.
Right, but that's not the question, yeah.
And my easy response to that is
fuck you.
No. It's if we lived in a perfect world, this show would have never started to begin with. Right. And unfortunately, we see on the news every single day something terrible. Some person, some POS doing something terrible to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And that's a crime. And we talk about true crime. It's like it's almost never ending. And in the heat of the moment, in the back of my mind, and no disrespect to anybody, but I'm always like, it seems like such a silly question. It just isn't, you know what I mean? It doesn't seem like a go-to to me. Sometimes people are making conversation.
Yeah, but there's a difference between, a murder and an interesting murder.
Well,
there's some cases that aren't that interesting, or there's not much information there. So, and
that's one thing I don't think I don't think some of the listeners understand is that.
But hold on too, because you're talking about there's a lot of cases that go unsolved, and some of that is due to the lack of scientific evidence or the procedures, or the testing that they can do. I mean, back in the day, you hope that you find a fingerprint. Mm-hmm. Now with DNA testing, with all the other tests that they can do, these cases are becoming more solved. And I think I think what they're getting at is there's a lot of these, some of the most fascinating cases are the unsolved cases. Mm-hmm. And are we going to see that?
Yeah, I can agree with that. We are very lucky we get a lot of our, let's call it material or cases that's better to say, cases that we select to put on the show from the listeners. We get emails, we get tweets, and we get, it's a lot of, hey guys, would you look into this? Or hey guys, would you cover this story? This is a case I knew about from my childhood or from my hometown. Mm-hmm. And we've said this before, the better the email, the better the information on the email, the faster that thing gets to our short list. And of course, sometimes we get emails that say, hey, I live in Chicago and some guy disappeared here in the 90s. Could you look into it? No, we can't. I mean, because most likely there were several people that happened to. We don't know who you're talking about.
Oh, right. But if they give us a name or it always helps if they give you a name, possibly a link, or possibly here's the name, here's a couple missing posters. Sometimes the emails are very detailed.
Oh, yeah. And no, I love those. Links are great. And the reason being is if you just give us a victim's name, mm-hmm. Especially if it's a common name, right. At least name and location is great. It really helps us narrow it down. But, I was telling this person, I said, the great thing about our listeners is that they want to be involved, and they are involved, and they reach out to us and they're like, hey, cover this case. And so I told them, I said, they do some of the legwork in a sense for us because we pick all of our cases from listener suggestions.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is we've done so many shows that now we receive suggestions for cases that we've already covered from time to time.
And I never know how to reply.
Well, sometimes they're new listeners that haven't listened to the old stuff. And then the other thing too is I didn't really think about this at the time when we were doing it, but if you were a new listener and you were just like flipping through our back catalog and looking for stuff to listen to, if we didn't title something the offender's name or the victim's name,
right?
Because sometimes we get kind of storybookish, and we will, a clever name will present itself, or we will come up with one from time to time. And so if you're flipping through the catalog and you see something like the fifth nail, well, that doesn't tell you the victim's names or the offender's name,
right?
But very lucky to receive those from all of our wonderful listeners. And I want
except for the people that send me John Benet Ramsey and Stephen Avery.
Okay, so
because I think we've definitely mentioned multiple times that the John Benet Ramsey one is it's a mountain of a case,
right?
So, and it's been covered by so many people. So I understand that. And maybe that's something that we'll cover loosely one day. I mean, there actually should be a bunch of popular cases that people ask us for that we should just cover on off the record because they don't actually want to hear all the details. They just really want to hear our thoughts.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like a lot of people are like, yeah, okay. Like the person last week was like saying, cover John Benet Ramsey. And I said, well, there's tons of people that cover that. I mean, we're talking about thousands of...
And some people have covered it very well.
Yeah, and some people not so well. So we're talking about... we're talking about it would take us weeks to get that information. So it'd probably have to be, if we ever did cover it, it'd have to be... There's so much misinformation of that case. It'd have to be like when we had a week off. So we'd have 2 weeks to research it. And then I also said, well, CBS did a really good job of going over some of this evidence and kind of laying out some of the thoughts there. And she goes, yeah, I just really want to hear your guys' thoughts on it.
Right.
And so maybe some of those cases we should just go, hey, we're not going to go over the details, but this is what our gut feeling is saying after we've looked at the evidence.
That's an incredibly interesting idea. Just to go, hey,
it's better than whatever we're talking about right now.
Well, so here's the thing. This is a good question. What would you say are the top 2 or 3? I'm not going to hold you to a specific number, but because we receive these requests, sometimes they email both of us, sometimes they email us separately, and of course you do the social media stuff, so people are reaching out to you that way as well.
I'm 100 messages behind on Instagram.
What would you say would be the top 2 or 3 cases that get recommended or requested to you?
John Benet Ramsey,
okay.
Stephen Avery. I already gave those, obviously. Scott Peterson.
Okay.
Those 3 lately.
Which is weird because those 3 I very rarely receive a request for.
But I think I've put out there that on something. I mean, I'm extremely fascinated by the John Benet Ramsey case. Extremely fascinated. Scott Peterson case, I never was interested in. I just thought he was a horrible dick nose and move on. He's convicted, but lately, I'm a big Adam Carolla fan. I was listening to Adam Carolla talk, and Mark Garagos is Scott Peterson's attorney. And he said definitively that his client didn't do it, and that he believes that when they get a chance, they're going to be able to prove that. And I have a lot of respect for Mark Garagos. And so the fact that he said that, I'm going, what does he know that is not being presented? Because there is a theory that there was some home break-ins, in that area. So that possibly whoever's breaking into the houses would be responsible for his wife and his daughter's death.
Well, and I can absolutely say this. That's a case that we plan to cover at some point. Probably soon.
What are your 3 that you get the most, you think?
Well, before we move on to that, I do want to throw this out there.
About Scott Peterson?
Yeah. So regarding the Scott Peterson case, I've always thought this guy's guilty as hell. Okay. Now, I'm not going to claim to have looked into it. Years ago, I looked into the case pretty well, at least I thought. But had a conversation this last weekend with somebody, and this is a guy that knows cases, and he knows how to really look at them and read between the lines. However, he's a dude that typically will lean towards the side of they're all guilty. You know, whoever they caught, whoever they threw behind bars, they got it right. He kind of leans that way when he has to. And having a conversation with him, he goes, Scott Peterson he absolutely did not kill them. And I thought, okay, well, now I'm interested. Now I want to know more about this case. Yeah. And I told him, I said, don't tell me anything. I don't want to know your opinions about it. This is something that we've put on our short list, so we'll cover it. And then I'll get the chance and you'll get the chance to dive into those details and see if we can find what some of those other people are claiming to mean that Scott Peterson, who I still think is guilty as hell, but there's smart people out there saying that he's innocent. So it'll be interesting to see what that is.
And what was this true story that was based on, what was that guy's name? I can't remember his name. The movie, True Story.
Yeah.
James Franco.
Yeah.
But he killed his family, later confesses.
Christian Longo. Was that
Christian
sound
Longo,
right?
That's right.
If you Google him, I think that's who it is.
That's correct. And I believe he eventually cracks and tells the truth. And then this guy recently, wife goes missing, his 2 daughters go missing. He's on TV saying, I just want them home. Mm-hmm. Something happens. That's an interesting case. Like, what's that guy's name? What's that guy's name?
Right.
God, I can't remember anybody's name today. But that guy, I think the FBI or law enforcement had something on him. The guy that's recently confessed.
The guy in Colorado, he killed his wife and 2 children.
Right.
Okay.
And he's saying, I want him home. 2 days later, he's saying, okay, I did it. With the Scott Peterson case, now we know he's a known liar. We know that.
Right.
And we know that he's a cheater.
Right. That's why it makes it a little easy to go.
Yeah, but Chris, what's his name?
Christian Longo
was
super liar.
Super liar. I mean,
like he lied more than Scott Peterson, if that's possible.
I think he told people. People probably didn't even ever know Christian Longo's real name because he just told people whatever. I mean,
he pretended to be a journalist, didn't he? Like he was using a real life person's name when he was on the run, and it happened to be a journalist that he had read, that he had respect for.
Yes.
That's like me going on the run and I'm like, you know what? I'm taking a new identity and my name is Edward Van Halen. I'll be living in the Cleveland area.
Is that you doing the fast finger tapping?
So cases that I get asked to cover the most. There's a case, victim's name is Morgan Nick out of Arkansas.
Maybe because your name is Nick.
Well, I don't know if it's that. I think it's because it's probably very likely one of the more famous, well-known cases from Arkansas. And to be honest with you, Captain, I'm not certain. I don't know enough about it to even tell you if it's unsolved or solved. But I do know that one is asked a lot. The weird thing is, I get a lot of requests for the state of Arkansas in general. And I don't know if I know we have a good deal of listeners there because of the Boys on the Tracks coverage that we did. Really got people in Arkansas listening to the show. So that's one that jumps off the page for me. Another one is the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. Mm-hmm. That's one that we get requested a lot.
Yeah, I see that one on. And the thing too is what I do is I write down like a daily list, and then I have like a master list. So when I go over to the master list, I kind of see, I'll write down that somebody asked for a job in A. Ramsey, and then I kind of just put a check mark by it. Yeah, and there's a couple cases that check marks keep on flying through. So what else you get?
Yeah, I do the same thing with my list. I will seek out the victim or offender's name, however I wrote it on the list originally, and I will put a check or a tally mark next to it, so I know, so I can go at a glance and go, you know what? Well, this case has been recommended like 30 times. We have to cover it at some point.
Yeah, and the interesting thing though too is when we pick the cases, we'll start. You'll create a list of like 5 or 6 that you're getting a lot, and then normally, especially the cases I've never heard of, I'll Google and I'll start writing down a couple things. So each case has a few notes by it, just so I know, what state it was in. Because sometimes we're getting a lot of missing persons in Ohio. We get a lot of those, probably because we're in Ohio. But it's like our show, we want to try to dive into all different kinds of cases. So, we try not to cover 4 or 5 missing person cases in a row.
Right. We try to switch it up from week to week. So, because everybody has different cases intrigue different individuals for different reasons.
Yeah. Well, and it's weird though too, because I think it's all just where you're at in your life, also where you're at in the week and where you're at in the day when you're Googling these cases. Because some of the cases that we put on the list, like maybe initially I'm going, oh, that's going to be okay. Or maybe I'm not as interested in that case.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's sometimes where it's like, then the week comes that it's time to research that case, and it's like the first Google search, I'm hooked.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my God, this is fascinating.
Mm-hmm. The tricky thing for me though is to when these suggestions come in, it requires you to spend a little time to, take 5 minutes and get familiar with the story a bit, with the case a bit, and then jot down some notes, put it on your list. The only tricky thing though is on nights when I spend quite a bit of time doing that, I have to remind myself at some point, we've already selected a case to cover for next week. Yeah. There are details in that case, and I don't want to mesh them with anything from an outside case and get things confused.
Right. And that's the other tough thing when people or when they start suggesting, hey, there's this documentary tonight on whatever, Oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
Or did you see this new show? And it's like, sometimes it's like, I actually shouldn't watch that,
right?
Because I need to focus on this one case. And then normally, it's weird because we'll record, let's say on a Tuesday and put out that show. There's you'd think that would be like true crimed out, but it's weird. It seems like on the days that we record, those are the days that I start catching up on the true crime docs.
One case that we got that I believe to be one of my top 2 or 3 requests would have been a Kenneka Jenkins update. Kenneka Jenkins update. She was the girl that died in the hotel in the Chicago area. And the reason why I think I received so many requests for that type of show, which we were lucky enough to have this platform, to have Off the Record, which we both love, and everybody else seems to love it too. So we were able to give an update there. And I was very happy to do so because I know so many people wanted to hear that. And I think we got so many requests for that because I don't know how many people were talking about that case at length like we did that early on. And so it got a lot of people, it made a lot of awareness for the actual case outside of the great state of Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And it put a lot of ears on the case, and people wanted to know the update. What happened? What actually happened? What was learned since the time that we covered the case?
What happened? Well, and if you haven't heard that episode, then, we can tell you. I mean, to sum up our beliefs, whatever their findings were, law enforcement's findings, that's also what the family believes happened. They stand by the findings. They did their, I believe, a separate investigation on top of the investigation. So you could pretty much just Google the results of that case, and you're going to kind of know where we stand. Because I mean, that would be a lot for us to go against not only law enforcement, but go against her family.
Right. So the findings were considered to be quote unquote accurate. So we will kind of leave it at that.
Okay, so what is you can name more than one. What is a case that you would love to cover, but because of the difficulty we haven't?
Difficulty that we haven't and probably won't. Jack the Ripper. And you know this, a lot of the listeners don't know this, but you know this. Jack the Ripper is a case for me that
Yeah, remember we lived.
It sounds weird to say this, but I love that case. Like I love the case in a sense that there's so much information out there. There's so many people that have looked at the thing over the years, and there's so many theories. I mean, the case is huge. It's absolutely huge and impossible. The only way you could cover it would be to give like a primer, like a very basic primer of the case, and then let people decide if they're interested enough to go and look into it on their own. Right. I think. But to me, I hold that case in such high regard that if we did cover it, I would want to cover it in a very unique way. The problem with that,
like in silence.
No, but the problem with that, Captain, would be that it would be extremely lengthy.
That's what she said.
And the thing being is that it would almost need to be its own show, its own separate show by itself, where it's, one season and you tear through the thing as much as you can. And that's actually horrible words. I'm sorry.
Remember when we lived together in the apartment and you had the Jack the Ripper thing on CDs?
Yeah.
From the library. It was like a book. And it was like 20 CDs or something insane. You had to like carry around this it was like a CD folder.
Uh-huh.
I just remember thinking at the time, like, oh, you're going to listen to a book on tape. That was probably actually the first time we ever really talked about talk radio or audiobooks.
Mm-hmm.
Was back then.
Yeah.
Any case other than that?
One that we haven't covered because it's lengthy, or for any other reason.
Or for any other reason.
I share your opinion on John Bonet. I've said on here that there's a serial killer named Donald Gaskins, Pee-wee Gaskins.
Yeah.
I don't want to cover him just because I can't. I've looked into his case and I've read books on his case, and he sickens and appalls me. I can't do the research. I can't read about him again. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so that would be one that would be an absolute no. Ted Bundy's weird, man, because I almost feel like, I know we did 3 episodes on Bundy, but I feel like Bundy's somebody that you can talk about till the end of time. There's just so much about his cases and about the victims that, and he was cross country, basically a cross country killer. He's a guy that escaped twice. And I know that it's not a great answer because we technically covered it and we did 3 episodes on it.
Right.
And I think all 3 of those might have gone over the hour mark, but I think Ted Bundy is somebody that you could do 20 episodes on.
Yeah. Bundy, I think you could. I actually think you could talk about Dahmer. I mean, we only did 1 episode on Dahmer.
Right.
But I think Dahmer is an individual that if you really start looking at all the little tiny details of his actions, I think you could talk about a really long time. You could do a whole series on it. The other one I think that you could talk about, you could be born until you die. You could talk about West Memphis 3. I mean, that case, that's probably the case that we've talked about the most between us off when we're not recording the show is probably, and I think you could talk about that. So one idea that you and I have kicked around several times, and we just don't know how it would go over until we do it. That's what's risky about what we do. We want the listeners to be entertained. We want them to be in the conversation. However, we don't know if they're going to like something until we release it. So it's a little bit risky on our end. Now,
one idea that we've kicked around, and I would love to get some feedback to hear if people want to actually hear this, is similar to the idea that you stated earlier, where you take a case, maybe it be a case that we covered or a case we didn't cover, and for a portion of Off the Record or for one episode of Off the Record, you just look into one aspect of that case. What's one thing that we could dive into for 20 minutes or 30 minutes and really kind of look at it and dissect it and examine it? You know, somebody like Ted Bundy, I'm telling you, Captain, like a couple weeks ago, good example. I'm looking up information on other cases, and I stumble across some Bundy thing that I remember watching or reading years ago, but I kind of forgot about it. And my thought was, man, I found this interesting back then. I still find it extremely interesting today. You know, I would love to, hey, let's talk about just this one little thing inside the case, and just get our thoughts and feelings on it.
Yeah, I mean, or take like West Memphis 3, you could talk about the blue wax. Mm-hmm. Stephen Avery's case, you could talk about the keys or the law enforcement, the police department that wasn't supposed to be involved but was involved in the investigation. Adnan Syed, you could talk about the rigor mortis part of that case. Mm-hmm. There's so many big time cases that would I think you could just dive into little sections of them and it'd be pretty interesting.
Well, let me give you a specific example, okay? And so you can give me your thoughts either here or off the record.
There is no off the record, asshole. But that's what we should do. If
our fourth show, we have another show coming out called off the record.
Yeah, if Stitcher says, "Hey, we're doing really well. We'd like for you guys to do another show a week," we'll say, "Oh, perfect. We got the perfect name for it."
And the best idea.
It's called Off the Record.
That's right.
This is strictly off the record.
So these are specific ideas, all right, regarding the West Memphis 3. So two things. I about a month or two ago, and I do this every couple of years. For whatever reason, I sit down and I watch
Touch Yourself.
Paradise Lost. And
the first one or all of them?
It always turns into all three of them. It's like once you start down that road, you can't stop.
Question now, do you also watch West of Memphis after that? That would be the fourth movie of the...
Actually, I watch that one the least. Like if I sit down to watch Paradise Lost...
It doesn't have the same character.
Right. And I know when I start to watch the first one that within the next week or two, I will have watched all three of them. Now, sometimes I'll venture on further to the west of Memphis, but typically not. And what's weird is that one for me is actually has more case type information.
Yeah.
Where the other three have not much of that at all. And it's more of just watching. I'm a sucker for that like grainy, looks like it was filmed with my dad's home VHS camera. And
is that why the video you released on our YouTube channel looks like that?
Yes, that was completely thought out and planned.
Homage.
No, that was just something that needed to be done. So, but these are two ideas that I found last time that I watched Paradise Lost. One thing that I cannot get over and I will not get over is Damien Eccles' statement about when he refers to himself as the boogeyman of West Memphis.
Oh, my God.
So we're not going to talk about that here today because we could talk about that for an hour, right?
Oh, you know how many people just got boners and lady boners right now? Like, they want to talk about it.
I'm a big tease. So here's the other one. And this is not one that we've discussed between the two of us before. I don't believe. We've had so many conversations, it's hard to remember. So here's the other one. When I was watching it, and this was in part 3, Paradise Lost Part 3, that I noticed something in the background that I found interesting. And I don't know if this points to anything or means anything, but when Mark Byers is at his home, this is after his wife has passed away, many years after the case in Part 3. He's sitting there at his desk, and in the background on his desk, I can see several. And I don't have an exact number here, but it's several. It's not one, it's not two. It's many John Douglas books, the FBI Mindhunter guy. And I found that I don't know what I think of that. And maybe we put some thought in that and have a conversation about that as well. But is that me being weird, or is it kind of weird?
Yeah. Or maybe the fact that he got basically sucked into the legal system and the crime world. I mean, we're talking about one of the most talked about cases of all time.
Well, that case specifically would have been mentioned in at least 2 or 3 of those books. So maybe he read those because that case was mentioned specifically in 2 or 3 of those books. And then he goes, hey, I really like reading John Douglas, so I just buy whatever he puts out. But it was a little unsettling.
Well, one could argue that he might not know how to read.
I think he read at church. Like, he read aloud at church. And I know he could train himself to memorize it's a speech. He could memorize it. But, no, I wouldn't, look, he doesn't come off as the smartest he doesn't come off as the sharpest tool in the shed, let's say. But I think at times I'm in that same shed. So I can say that fairly and accurately. But, I don't see any reason why he couldn't read. It was really weird, though, to see the BTK, Hunting the BTK book on his desk.
Yeah, but maybe he thought, again, or maybe he read them and thought that he could learn something from this.
Learn something to help his own case.
Right.
I mean, this case of his son being killed.
Right. Because, I mean, we kind of went over the evidence. It's really hard. I mean, even though in Paradise Lost episode 2, they kind of put it on him, saying he is the killer.
Right.
But I think the evidence kind of points away from that. So, again, if he's not the killer, then he's looking to figure out who is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. So yeah, I mean that'd be good to like maybe cover not the whole case, but just a section of the case. The only thing that you get into is if somebody doesn't know any information about the case, and then we start going off on these tangents, and if you don't know anything about the case, people are going, I don't know anything.
Well, with some of them, that's when you direct them to your original coverage. We did do 3 pretty good episodes on West Memphis too.